the people of sake actually brought me into sake.
Back in 1988, this place was actually in Ginza on the main drag.
At first it was kind of soy sauce, it was miso.
To the point where it actually changed my life.
New Year's Day 1989.
Not just sake as a beverage, but all the culture and history.
Hello, everybody out there. This is Sake on Air, brought to you by the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association, here just a few short steps away from Toranomon Station in downtown Tokyo. Big thank you to the JSS for continuing to put us up as we explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the good, the bad of Japan's indigenous drinks. Today, I am here with Christopher Hughes.
Hello.
And Justin Potts.
Hello out there.
Who has been urging me for the last 5 minutes or so to start this show off in my own way and on my own note. I am Christopher Pellegrini, and today we are going to be basically doing a entry-level rundown of Shochu and Awamori, Japan's two indigenous spirits. But of course, I probably need to have somebody else fill in some of the gaps that I have left gaping open. So with that, I'm going to shift over to Justin here. Justin, what did I miss?
All right. What did you miss? What did you miss in terms of
the intro?
Life? No? No, we're good. You had it. Spot on. I guess the only other thing we're missing is that we're broadcasting, as always, from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center.
Oh, that's right.
Right?
Okay.
Yes. Because it's this lovely establishment that takes such good care of us. So we're trying to take good care of them. So aside from that, we're spot on. That was beautiful. So yeah, we're gonna do Shochu this week. Much deserved. This needs some proper time, and we're gonna. Here's the reality of the situation, though. This is actually the second time we're doing this.
This is true. Yes.
This is the realities of technology
Right.
and recording and human error and mixing beverages and all those other things. Sometimes data doesn't end up in the state that we would like for it to preserve itself.
Yeah.
And so occasionally we have to...
It's like a shochu-filled Groundhog Day, isn't it?
That's basically what it is. We are drinking a different shochu this time. We're drinking a Iki Barley Shochu,
Very nice it is too.
which is it's the very well-known Super Gold, made by Genkai Shuzo, barrel-aged, only 22% alcohol. It's kind of like a diet whiskey in a way.
Diet whiskey.
It's a very lo-fi bourbon almost, but...
Nice. You mentioned this was on Iki Island. This is the most common,
This is probably the best-selling brand from Iki Island of the 7 distilleries on that island. And if you go to Nagasaki City, which is geographically very far removed from Iki Island, most places or most bars anyway will have a bottle of this, straw-hued barley shochu, which is protected internationally by the WTO, the Ikijochu appellation.
Right. And we'll get into that.
Yes, we will.
Right? How those different sort of regions and the nature of those regions. So we will get back into that. Before we do that, we thought we'd just kind of catch up on a little bit of sake and shochu related happenings and news and just kind of warm up our brains and palates as we prep for round 2 of Shochu 101.
Yes, take 2.
Ding, ding.
Yeah. Ding,
Ding, ding. So, word.
You're looking for news from my end.
Yeah,
okay.
have you gotten something? Yeah.
I mean, I may just repeat something that was mentioned on I think it was on the last Shochu episode. Did I talk about the different events that happened at the beginning of November?
Something about that. Yeah, Shochu
So
Day
that got scrubbed. So we can probably do that again, huh?
Yeah, why not?
I mean, I think it's important for people to realize that November 1st is officially designated as honkaku shochu and Ryukyu Awamori no hi, which is the day of shochu and Awamori. And it much like Nihonshu no hi on exactly 1 month earlier, it's a celebration of these drinks, and there's festivals, tastings, pairings, all sorts of hijinks performed all across the country.
Right.
There's a decent-sized festival here in Tokyo, and then I was down in Kyushu, down in Shochu HQ, and there's a 3-day festival. The biggest one is called Shochu Street, which is in Kagoshima City, right downtown in Tenmonkan. And under the arcade, they set up these booths that are different zones from the Shochu region in Kagoshima, and I think they had 113 distilleries there, all from Kagoshima, set up by zone. They also had a Shinshu booth as well, which was pretty full on, and it was, it's a hell of a deal. You go and pay, I think, what was it? It was like 500 yen. You get 5 drinks or something ridiculous like that. And they're not small drinks. It's like an adult size pour. And you go around and try them all. And yeah, it's a heck of a time. And it goes for 3 days. So it is wild. It's a very good destination event. If you're ever free, November 1st to 3rd, book early, grab your ticket, get down to Kagoshima City and have some fun. Now on the 3rd also, there was an event, and I booked it up by train to get there in Miyazaki City in their own arcade. They do Shochu non giorno.
Okay. I see what you're up to.
I
see what your game is.
And that's it's a similarly planned out idea, except for not each, but most of the distilleries have their own little table that's separate from everybody else's. There's not as many distilleries in Miyazaki, so it's a little bit easier to compress like that. And I think it was 2,000 yen. You got this really nice metal tumbler, like double line tumbler that can keep warm things warm and keep cold things cold, that was branded with the non giorno label. And it was a free-for-all as long as you had that mug for a few hours. Yeah, wow. It was high quality. Nice. It overperformed.
So, Chris, what is shochu?
Great question. Excellent question. I hear that one all the time. And let's start with a couple of the important basics. Basic number 1 is it's a spirit, right? It is distilled. It's in the same family of the glorious drink traditions of, well, let's say whiskey and tequila and rum and vodka and gin. But it's also typically bottled at between 25 and 30% alcohol. So it's a little bit of a mid-weight spirit, I guess you could say. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why it is bottled relatively low is because the distillate, when it comes off the still, is relatively low if you compare it to other types of spirit. And that is because you are only allowed to use a pot still, and you can only use it once when you make shochu, honkaku shochu, and I guess I should say what that is. Honkaku shochu is this authentic, the premium, the old school, the traditional style of shochu that is single distilled and only made from approved ingredients. And I'll get back to that in a moment. Single distilled. That means that, for the most part, whatever starch source, whatever grain or tuber the shochu or the awamori is made from, it's going to taste and smell a lot like that starch source. And that differentiates it quite a bit from other distillates. Now, when it comes off of the still, depending on what it's made from, the most popular type of shochu happens to be, in Japan, sweet potato. That typically is about 37 to 38% ABV. And that's because it hasn't gone through a pot still a second time, like many whiskeys are. You're not allowed to do that. You can't do that and then write honkaku shochu on the label. It's just the tax authorities will come and rain all over your parade. So there's a lot of rules. I think that's what I'm kind of indicating here. And it's a mid-weight spirit, partly because it starts out as a rather low ABV spirit. Now, they lower it down to 25% for most sweet potato shochu, most rice and barley shochu, because at 26, the tax goes up. So it's the tax authorities have a very keen eye focused on the way the way that alcohol is produced and where it's produced and how it's enjoyed. Having said that, I think the alcohol laws in Japan are a little bit more flexible and a little bit more friendly to the consumer than in many other parts of the world. But it's a spirit, 25 to 30% alcohol, pot still, so you get a lot of the aroma and the flavors of the ingredients that were used to make it.
Okay. And then what are those ingredients? What is it made from?
So the number 1 ingredient is by sales, as I already said, was sweet potato. Number 2 by sales is barley. Number 3 by sales is rice. And then after that, you've got a whole bunch of other things that actually, when you look at the sales figures, don't even compare, especially to the top 2. But we're talking about kokuto shochu, which is Japanese brown sugar. Basically, it's nearly unrefined brown sugar. So it's not the nonsense that people cook with in other parts of the world, not that granulated, they add the molasses back into it type stuff.
Right.
This is stuff that it's good. It's really good.
It's really good.
And-
I give that to people for like souvenirs and stuff like that. Sometimes people a lot of times they don't use it like sugar. They use it to nibble on because it's delicious like chocolate. Like not that it tastes like chocolate, but it's like that kind of
it is so
It reminds me
satisfying.
of treacle a little bit. We have this thing called treacle.
Yeah.
We eat as sweets in the UK. It reminds me of that quite a bit.
Yeah. That type of shochu, kokuto shochu. I like to use the word kokuto because I think that it's doing it a disservice to call it brown sugar in a way because it's misunderstood.
Absolutely.
I mean,
it makes sense to permeate that vocabulary into the
kokuto,
market.
and I've noticed that a lot of the makers print in English kokuto on the label. They would love for that to become recognizable outside of Japan, so I'm going to use that.
Cool.
Kokuto's big. Soba or buckwheat shochu is very popular.
I love soba shochu.
Sesame shochu, and then you've got all sorts of other things. There's 53 approved base ingredients, and some of the more like odd ones might be silver vine, which is essentially catnip's more potent cousin. But this is it's much more potent. You give catnip to your cat, and that's a good couple of hours for the cat, right?
Yeah.
You give a cat silver vine, that's a weekend bender.
Party.
Yes.
Party.
And that is an approved ingredient. And there's a lot of these regional things like aloe. There's
I just had pumpkin the other day.
There are
Pumpkin,
several types of
pumpkin
squashy,
shochu's good.
pumpkin-y type things.
Lettuce shochu is
Yes,
quite
lettuce.
interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
And,
Edamame.
bunch of stuff.
Edamame shochu, really?
I had edamame.
Oh, wow.
But the main types are basically, the big groups are potatoes, sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
And there's dozens of varietals. So that's a huge, huge family right there. Then grains.
Yeah.
Okay, then you've got sake kasu that Chris mentioned before. So you can take the lees from the sake production process and distill those to make a specific type of shochu. And then the fourth big group is the kokuto, as I said before. Now, the interesting thing about kokuto, and this is going to lead itself into how special these categories are. The cool thing about kokuto is that according to the Japanese government, kokuto shochu can only be made on the Amami Islands, which are technically part of Kagoshima Prefecture, but they're closer to Okinawa than they are to mainland Kagoshima. And that's the only place you can make kokuto shochu in the entire country. You make the same drink on any other piece of land in the country, and it'll be taxed as a regular spirit. But it's taxed as shochu if and only if it's made with a rice koji, starter mash, and then kokuto in the secondary and sometimes tertiary mash. So that's protected by the Japanese government. It's kind of like a geographical indication, but it's only domestic. It's not internationally recognized. The internationally recognized types, and this is crazy, most people living in this country, 99.9% of people living in Japan don't know this. Japan has 4 GIs for their indigenous spirits. And one we've already talked about. It was the Iki Shochu. There are 7 distilleries on Iki Island, which is a tiny little strip of land. And they are allowed to make a barley shochu called Iki Shochu. It has to be a rice starter fermentation with barley, basically twice as much barley in the secondary fermentation as rice was used in the primary. That's a big one. Number 2 is sweet potato shochu made in Kagoshima from local spuds, and that can be labeled as Satsuma shochu. Kuma shochu from Kumamoto is a rice shochu that has to be made by one of the 27 distilleries hugging the Kuma River in the Hitoyoshi Basin area. And then the 4th one is another drink made from rice, but it's technically got a different name. It's called Awamori. The GI is Ryukyu Awamori. Ryukyu referring to the former kingdom name of those islands. And it's made with Thai rice. It's a rice drink, but it is nearly always made with Thai rice, and it can only be made in the Okinawan Islands. So there's those 4 appellations plus the kokuto, so that's a regional one, 5. It's got tons of history. It's been around for well over 500 years. It's not a new trendy thing. It's been here forever, and you can find it everywhere, but it is largely unknown outside of Japan.
Wow. And as you said, in Japan, everybody knows shochu, and it's either barley or it's potato. But
those are the big ones.
Anything above and beyond that is pretty much off the radars of probably 98% of the population. Right?
Yeah.
And you touched upon very briefly there at the end, Awamori.
Awamori.
Right. So we got a pretty solid definition of shochu, kind of what that's made from, where it comes from, being, distilled and sort of what that is. How does then Awamori differ from shochu? Because it has a different name. And
Great
as
question.
you said, it can only be made or at least it can only.
Well,
Well, this is what we're going to
Ryukyu
find out.
Awamori, yeah.
Ryukyu Awamori can only be produced in the Okinawan Islands.
Right.
Is there a difference in process as far as how that is made? Is there a difference in ingredients? You mentioned using Thai rice. What are these? How does this differ?
Excellent
from shochu?
questions. Excellent questions. Let me start with the similarities. Similarities are, and I haven't said this yet, both spirits are made with koji. Koji all day, every day. And that's just, part and parcel with Japanese cuisine. If you don't know what koji is,
we'll do a separate episode
Yeah.
just on koji one of these days.
but koji
It deserves
is...
its own episode.
Oh, absolutely. Japan's national mold. And there are 3 major families of koji. And as you probably are aware, the people out there in sake on air land, they know that Nihonshu is made with yellow koji. Shochu uses all 3. One difference, Awamori only uses black. And so that would be one difference. But the thing that is similar is that both shochu and Awamori are made using koji, of course. Another similarity is that you can only use a pot still to make Awamori, just like shochu. And, you use rice. So that's a similarity as well. Now, the one big procedural difference is that in order to make Ryukyu Awamori in the traditional sense and to be able to print that on the label, you have to do a single moromi fermentation. It's all one step. And so they call it zenkoji shikomi. So it's all koji, all rice koji fermentation, and then what you have is what you get. And it goes straight into the still after that. There's no secondary, there's no steps, there's no stages. It's a much more traditional style of making the drink than shochu is.
Okay, so you're essentially going straight from what could essentially be considered the starter.
It basically
kind of
is.
from the fermentation mash,
Yeah.
and then
It's
that
straight into the
product then
still.
goes straight into the still.
Yes.
As opposed to with sake, you have the starter, and then you
Have a couple more steps, right?
A few more steps, a few more days, and then another fermentation process and then that develops.
Exactly.
Okay.
So and that's the way I think many hundreds of years ago sake wasn't nearly as drawn out as it is today.
Exactly.
That's right.
Shochu wasn't either. Shochu has less strictures in terms of shochu doesn't have this all-encompassing GI that controls all of these ingredients. Shochu can be made from so many different things. Awamori can only be made from rice. So that's a pretty limiting factor. And then the single step fermentation stricture or restriction, that also kind of limits what you can do. So it's a very old school style, and it is technically older than shochu. It's shochu's uncle, I guess we could probably say.
Right.
Because the distillation technology traveled north from the Ryukyu Islands up into the Amami Islands and then over to Yakushima and then to Tanegashima and then hopped over into the bay up into Kagoshima City. Or maybe not all the way up into the city, but probably somewhere along the southern coast. And Awamori is its own thing. It's got a different name, but you could technically make something similar in anywhere in Japan and call it a shochu. You could call it an awamori too. You just couldn't call it a ryukyu awamori.
Right.
Vice versa. Could you call something that's made like a shochu an awamori? Yeah, if it was made from rice with black koji, I suppose you could. And it was a single. Well, I guess you don't have to do the single step fermentation unless you want to make a ryukyu awamori.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I guess awamori in and of itself is not incredibly restrictive, but that GI is. That GI respects the 600 years of history. So they don't have a lot of wiggle room there.
Where does that? I personally like the vanilla flavor that you get. With,
Yeah.
Vanilla aroma that you get with awamori. Where does that come from?
It's from the Thai rice, I imagine, and you probably know as much about the Thai rice and the benefits of using it, and the why would you stick with Thai rice all this time? And a lot of it's tradition, but probably you can comment on that as well. What are some of the other benefits of using Thai rice? Do you think?
Well, in the case of sake, I mean, you can't really use kind of Thai rice. It's not impossible, but it's difficult to polish the rice because it's generally
It's brittle,
long grain as well, right?
Yeah,
so
it cracks easily.
It cracks in the wrong place. So we're left with the wrong part of the rice after the polishing, and it generally it's harder as well, and maybe a little bit too hard for making sake. There are theorists out there that think one day we'll probably be making sake with Thai rice, maybe if the polishing technology develops in a way that makes that possible. The first thing I would think of, I suppose, is that you've got more protein, than you have starch, maybe, and
that's going to add some girth to the
right. And because the rice is harder, maybe it's going
profile.
to be easier to handle and easier to control when it kind of breaks up in the fermentation. But perhaps breaking the rice up in the fermentation isn't such a
it's not.
Well, if you're just
major
doing
thing.
that single, if you're basically going essentially kind of from the starter as well too,
Right.
you're getting kind of more concentrated.
It'll absorb
Yeah.
moisture a little bit quicker too.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Right.
So
Interesting.
I can comment a little bit more on why it's more complex than, for instance, a rice shochu. Rice shochu usually, more often than not, is made with a more modern pot still called a low pressure or a vacuum still. It's a genatsu joryu is the technical term. And it essentially creates a vacuum inside the pot during distillation, which allows you to boil the moromi, the wort, or the mash, I should say, not the wort, at a far lower temperature than normal, which provides for a much softer treatment of whatever is in that mash. And so the rice shochu, the kuma jochu kumiai, most of them switched over to genatsu joryu a long time ago, which is why rice shochu tends to be very light, nice fragrance, but it's a very, very low profile type of shochu. It really is easy for a lot of people to understand. Some of the drinks will have nice ginjo qualities. They'll be using very high quality rice from the area, and it's the opposite of genatsu is atmospheric distillation, which is joatsu joryu, and the number of joatsu produced rice shochu is actually not that large. Awamori, on the other hand, is almost entirely joatsu, which means that, alcohol, sorry, and I can't do the Fahrenheit off the top of my head, but alcohol will evaporate at 78 degrees Celsius, right? So that is far higher than genatsu. Genatsu, you can get to waft off, to mist off at like 45, So you're getting a much more wholesome treatment of the mash constituents at an atmospheric distillation. Atmospheric being the traditional style. Like the original pot stills. Those were atmospheric stills. They weren't sealed at all, really.
Yeah.
And of course, these days we have more modern stills that are made out of stainless steel, and they're much easier to maintain and to clean, and they're much more consistent. But there is a huge difference when you use a vacuum still as opposed to a traditional atmospheric distillation.
Interesting.
And the big thing with other spirits, so we're kind of we're enjoying a shochu here, which tastes quite, has a lot of whiskey kind of notes in it, and so whiskey just kind of popped into my mind. And one thing about whiskey, of course, is the aging that you do and the kind of different vessels that you use as well. Is there any of that with shochu or awamori, and is that part of the regulations? Or
Okay, great. What awamori has going for it, and not that any other type of aging is inferior, but awamori has a long-standing shitsugi, what is called shitsugi, which is fractional blending tradition, much like a solera in the sherry world.
Oh, okay.
And just amazing history to some of these drinks, because you're not just drinking this year's batch, you're drinking this year's batch mixed with last year's batch mixed with batches from 3 generations ago, because they'll have pots lined up.
Wow.
Right? And when you take from the oldest pot, then you refill with the second oldest pot, and the third oldest pot goes into the second oldest pot, and then you go all the way back to the end of the shitsugi, and then that's where you add this year's to fill up.
It's exactly like the Solera
It's exactly
system.
like it.
Did it come from that, or
I
is
don't think
just
it did.
coincidence?
I think it was a coincidence.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Very interesting.
And that is very, very cool. There's a lot of pot aging, which adds minerality to the drinks. It allows UV sun rays to get through. There's some communication with the outside air. The pots sweat. It's a really cool style. Now, of course, enamel tank or glass line tanks are also a thing, but pot aging is or clay earthenware vessel aging is a big thing for awamori.
So there's so much potential for that added value to something like that. It's
Absolutely.
really special stuff.
Absolutely.
That's also been kind of sort of part of the appealing angle of awamori for me, is being able to dip into that, and it's not just the really complex and nuanced really fascinating flavor profiles and it just being generally delicious.
Yeah.
But just the cultural associations with that as well. They do that on a production level, but there's like families will do that on a personal level as well.
Right.
People will
Absolutely.
have that at home and they will use that to, commemorate big
yeah,
life
yeah.
events and
Absolutely.
things like that. So you go to people's homes and they might have, these pots that are lined up for the last,
Right.
Yeah.
15 years or 20 years that, this is the one we got when, so-and-so was born, or this is when we got married, or things like that.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Chuko, which is a great distillery just outside of Naha,
They are
and
fantastic.
they are, yeah, and they have their own style of pottery that is kind of like their style.
They're the ones that do the
the
4-day
Yeah, that's the
koji
yoka
thing.
koji.
Yeah,
Yep.
the yoka koji.
And
That's
they have
amazing.
they have these pots that when they kiln the pots, they actually allow the flames to scald the outside of the pots. It's a really distinctive style. And they do a lot of their own aging and in their tasting room at the distillery. And if you're in Naha, you absolutely must just take a quick cab ride out
Yes.
to that place. Underneath the tasting room is an aging cellar where lots of families have, brought their newborn in and they do a handprint on this thing and they're going to hold that earthenware pot of Awamori until the kid turns 20 or until he gets married or something like that.
They do a similar thing.
Very,
with
very
sake,
cool.
Wrapping it in newspaper.
Oh, great.
With-
Yeah, to
with-
date it.
with something on, and used as something on there for the
Fantastic.
date that you were born, and then you obviously, the newborn goes back and retrieves it when they're of
Fantastic.
age that
Yeah,
they can
we're just taking care of this for you until you're old
Yeah.
enough to drink.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's a great thing.
Love it. So Awamori is, the aging in Awamori, I mean, you'll find places that, they put it in bottles and they sink the bottles to the bottom of the ocean and they age it down there. There's a lot of different techniques, but I would say clay is pretty common. If we move north into Shochu territory, you've got a bit more diversity there. And there's the clay pot aging that happens as well. And you also get for larger distilleries, a lot of tank aging. And then there's a lot more barrel aging. And of course, some of the barrels are made here. Some of them are new wood, but there's a lot of repurposed bourbon and sherry casks that are used in Japan. Japan's a major customer for those
The
industries.
sake industry is picking
Becoming
up on
one.
that
Yep.
as well. So they're
Yep.
starting
Yes.
to
Yeah.
dip their toes into that
There's a
water as
lot
well.
of fun that can be had. We're gonna get a lot of kind of suspect stuff in the interim because I probably shouldn't say this. This is my way of thinking of it, but I would be, if I was in the market for used casks, wouldn't you be a little nervous about that? Like, what is the quality of this used cask? What was it? What exactly has been in it before? So I would be a little bit, I would need to be in the hands of a very competent broker to make sure that I was getting what I thought I was getting. But having said that, there is a ton of excellent product coming out, and there will be so much more soon. Just through my own personal connections to the industry, the number of there's a bunch of distilleries that are playing around with things, and they have been for a while. So there's a lot of stuff that's sleeping right now that's going to just
gonna
be
come to
sprung on us.
fruition here
Yes.
pretty soon.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff that'll come out. I imagine with the Olympics barreling down on us, I bet 2020 sees a bunch of interesting labels coming out.
2 years left.
Oh, yeah, we're right there,
Could
man.
still happen.
We are
Not
right
even 2
there.
years left.
Not even.
It could still happen. And we got the rugby, obviously. Before
That's
that.
true.
One question I have, when I was working in London, and actually, I work for a Japanese food and drink ingredients supplier. So as well as sake, we were also selling like plum wine and shochu, and so I have a bit of experience shochu sales myself. And one problem I would have in London is that a lot of people would mispronounce shochu as
Yeah.
soju.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So what is this soju thing?
Okay,
and
yeah,
does this cause problems for you?
Oh, it's the biggest thorn in my backside and in my neck and in my rib.
hip.
Yeah, everything in between. So, soju. So soju is a product. It's a very very what's the word? Consumed on an insane level drink from Korea, and it is a spirit. It's not made in a pot still, so it doesn't taste like what it's made from. It's essentially it's a vodka that is distilled up to maximal ethanol proof, which is around 95 to 96%. And then it's bottled at, these days it's pretty low. It's down in the teens. I've seen a lot that's in the 16s and 17s these days. When I lived in Korea, it was 22. But I think as the, I think the industry is trying to preserve profit margins, so they just keep on watering it down a little bit more and a little bit more. So now we're down into a territory that a lot of Korean fans of the drink are no longer happy with. They're just like, this is not what I always used to drink. And it tastes very different now. Whatever. That's a huge thing, not just in Korea, but internationally. There are a number of Soju brands, SOJU, that are selling very well around the world, particularly in Korean barbecue joints and other types of restaurants. And it's a communal type of drink, It's, you pour for each other. It's consumed at pace. It's a very lively atmosphere. It's just how it works. And unfortunately, California. And I don't think this is the same case. This is not the same case in England, but saying shochu for whatever reason, SHOCHU, is difficult for a lot of people. It's really hard for people to say. Yeah. Soju, on the other hand, is not so tricky. There's very few, internal acrobatics that need to take place. So that's one thing. But the other thing is California. California state, the Korean diaspora back in the 90s, lobbied the state legislature to be able to serve soju, which at that point was still in the 20s, I think, in terms of ABV.
The Korean soju.
Korean soju, thank you. To be able to serve that on a soft liquor license. Now, soft liquor in California, as it is in most places, is beer and wine. It's a regular license that a normal restaurant would want to have in order to serve beer and wine, not spirits. Now, soju and shochu, that'll come in later, are relatively low-proof spirits. So it doesn't make sense for a mom-and-pop Korean barbecue place to get a full-blown bar license, which is really hard to do anyway and cost prohibitive. It's the number of those licenses are often restricted by jurisdiction. So it didn't make any sense for one of those shops to go out and get a full bar license when all they wanted to serve was soju. So they lobbied and they organized and they did a great job and they got the law changed. They made it so that you could serve anything labeled SOJU that was bottled at 24% or lower.
And came in a green bottle.
that
was the part of the term.
It doesn't have to be green. It seems to always be green if it's from Korea. It is those little green bottles, the 350 ml bottles. Wow. Yeah. But they got it done. And so now in many places with soft liquor licenses, you can find soju. Now, the shochu industry, which was not selling any shochu in the States back in the 90s, was like, oh, that's a big loophole, isn't it? We'll just bottle 1% lower than normal. We'll dilute just a little bit more. We'll just write SOJU somewhere on the front label, and then we can sell our stuff at Japanese restaurants. Okay, at the time, I'm sure it was a great idea.
It seemed like a nice idea at the time.
So what has happened, though, is that, with the omnipotence of Korean soju, those green bottles, everybody, and the fact that it says soju on all the Japanese shochu, nobody knows the difference. And of course, those same labels are not just used in California because California is a very, very large market. They're used all over the country. So that's just the de facto export label, which is, for someone like me, is infuriating because one of the most common exchanges I have with people is I say, okay, so who's had shochu before? And lots of people are like, yep. And I say, okay, where was the first place you had shochu? And invariably, more than half of those people will say, oh, I had a Korean restaurant. Okay. So there's no recognition of the difference between the two drinks. With the American market in particular, we're not starting from zero with them per se. We're actually starting from minus about 15 to 20 because some of the people in this room that I'm talking to, when I'm talking in front of, at Kumiai events or whatever, some of you guys in this room have been actively misinforming our target audience since the 90s. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
And they know who they are and they know, we shouldn't do that, but it just hasn't been worth their while yet to go against it. And there is a draft in the legislature. There's a draft in the pipeline to amend the law in California to allow shochu to also be labeled faithfully and sold on a soft license, but it's been in limbo since like The Last Jedi or something like that.
You mentioned honkaku shochu, and this being the quote unquote traditional or the real deal. Right.
Yes.
Single pot still.
Mm-hmm.
When you say traditional in what sense? In what term? Are we talking from 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And I guess this would maybe lead us to, where in the heck did shochu come from? Is that honkaku shochu? Is that the origin of shochu? It's like, for example, in the sake world, a lot of people associate, real sake or the proper sake with something like ginjo, daiginjo, whereas that's a world that has only existed for a small fraction of the historical
last 20
timeline, right?
years,
We're only
basically.
really
Yeah.
looking at, it actually being a true a product that's available on the market for people for the last 30 years, 40 years,
about
maybe.
the 1980s. I
You
think,
know,
with the boom.
and so is honkaku shochu, is that something that
Yeah.
is that its original state? Is that something that has come about recently? What is
The word honkaku was the result of this traditional single distilled style kind of being seen in a poor light, mostly by its former name, because of its former name. Now, the single distilled stuff was just shochu forever. Then in 1910, the column still started to be used in Japan to make a new style of shochu, which was essentially a vodka. Okay, it was a koji-based vodka. The column stills allows you to make a nearly pure ethanol spirit. And that was a revelation because it was clean, it was easy, it was cheap to make. And that became known as korui shochu.
Okay.
Korui, and then the traditional stuff, and it wasn't really thought of as traditional, just the older stuff. The original shochu was otsurui. And you know the difference between ko and otsu. Ko is better, is superior. Otsu is inferior. And it was that way for quite a while. That was not great for the old school industry that was still making shochu in a relatively traditional way. So they rebranded. And they came up with a new word, or they decided they were all going to start using honkaku. And honkaku meant traditional style, so single distilled. And I actually don't know exactly when the list of 53 ingredients was officially codified, but it only uses those ingredients that are designated by the tax office and nothing else. Nothing else can be called honkaku. So honkaku, the word honkaku came about as a way to defend the quality of the category from this weird naming, just this wrinkle of the naming world that they really didn't have any control over. It just happened to them, kind of.
okay?
And that's where honkaku came from. So it's not an old word, really.
Okay.
It's a relatively recent concoction.
Right. In Japanese, honkaku essentially means like the real deal.
Authentic.
Exactly.
Authentic.
Authentic.
There we go. That's better.
Yeah. It's been variously translated as premium as well. I like authentic. I think authentic is a
Yeah.
great way to put it.
I've had some good korui shochu. So, I think it's possible you could have premium korui shochu as well, right?
Yeah, you could. It
Yeah,
just
it doesn't have as much
wouldn't-
flavor, does it? Because obviously it's been distilled multiple times.
Yeah,
so.
it's not. I mean, it's something that generally gets mixed. I mean, when you
That's when you start looking at maybe cocktails and things like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Might be more.
Yeah.
that you could more faithfully. You could say that it's similar to Korean soju, except for Korean soju has tons of sweeteners added to it. You could do that with korui, but it's not necessary because people make chu-hai with it, right? That's what, if you go to a Japanese supermarket and you see a gigantic plastic 5-liter jug of something at the bottom of the spirits aisle, that's korui shochu probably. And no, you should not buy it. And no, you should not drink it unless you just lost a significant court case. I mean, it's not really meant to be consumed on its own.
Right. And so there's maybe potential to use that in things like cocktails and whatever.
Absolutely.
However, if what's in this really fancy cocktail you got? Oh, shochu. And then that becomes the standard, then you're kind of going down another slippery slope where you're using
That's
something that is
absolutely-
misinterpreting what it
that's
is. Oh,
absolutely
what is this
correct.
thing you're putting in there? And then you're giving people a taste at the bar and they're going, okay, this is I see what this is.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
not very exciting at all. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
So a thing that I want to say is that shochu is not only bottled at 25 to 30%. There's a lot of stuff, especially these days, it's becoming more popular. The so-called genshu, the undiluted shochu. If it's like I said before, sweet potato, it's going to be 37 to 38 probably. If it's rice, which has tends to have a much better starch content, it's going to be up in the low 40s. Honkaku shochu can be bottled as high as 45 or 44.9% alcohol, and then anything above that is going to just be labeled as a spirit.
Okay.
And But you can get decent alcohol content on your shochu as well. And it's becoming a thing. I mean, it always has been a thing, but there are more and more consumers in Japan that are seeking it out. And I think it has potential in the States as well. You were talking about yoka koji. I think that's a great example. It's a very complex drink.
It is.
That in a good bar, you could just pour that in a glass and slide it across the bar and say, hey, check this out.
Right.
This is just wild. It's got so many layers. It's a transformer type of drink.
Right.
And there is a lot of that out there. It's just not easy to find because it's not as easy to sell. There's not as much of a market for it. But I think it has potential. I think that's a big one for the overseas market in particular.
And are there any shochu which have like really, really low levels of alcohol to make it really, really accessible to people who don't like drinking spirits?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. There are a couple, especially these days. One really good one is it's called Q, made by Kuroki Honten, which came out a couple of years ago. And I'm going to get it's in the low teens, I think, or it might even be like, I think it's 15, but it may be as low as 14. And it's made not with the traditional or the regular kogane sengan sweet potatoes, which are super fleshy white. This is more of an orangish type of sweet potato that has a great aroma, even at a low alcohol content. And, chill it, put it in a flute. It's pretty good. I was absolutely blown away by, even when chilled, the aroma off of this low proof shochu. I was like, how did you do that? And I didn't get an answer. The guy just the toji, the master distiller, just looked at me with this big grin on his face. He's like, I'm not going to tell you. I can't. you can come and see, but then I'll have to kill you. But there are a few. But the other side of this discussion that I want to we haven't talked about before, we didn't talk about it last time, is basically all spirits are diluted, and I want people to remember that. Your whiskey is diluted. Your vodka absolutely is, because if you drank it at the pure distillate strength, you'd go blind. Yep. All right. So I mean, dilution in the spirits world is not rare. Yep. And if you look at the number of points that shochu is being diluted, it's actually far less than vodka is being diluted, or gin is being diluted. So there's actually arguably less dilution. So I just want people to be aware of that. I know people are, why do you dilute it? Well, okay, yeah, there's a bunch of explanations for that, but you should be asking the same question about everything you drink. Okay, now if you don't like dilution so much, then fine. Drink beer, drink wine, drink nihonshu, which gets diluted very, very little. But don't cross shochu and awamori off the list just because it's diluted, because that's just standard practice.
Yeah, it just as a result, because it doesn't really exist something where in that market, a lot of stuff that's around that alcohol percentage are, liqueurs or these other, just a completely different category that is used entirely differently, or whatever. And so these types of things with this flavor profile at that ABV is just, it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. And so it's kind of like...
Yeah, that's certainly the case. Everybody is confused by that midweight ABV.
Right. But the numbers on the bottle don't tell the whole story.
No. Maybe in the industry, maybe it's best, going forward, not to talk about the dilution in shochu, because one thing is that you never talk about it with whiskey, right? You never talk about it with vodka.
It's never even pondered,
right? So maybe the mistake is actually talking about dilution to begin with, and then of course you get people asking about, and then they, maybe just as a kind of an idea, maybe it's best not to, it's lower alcohol, but kind of leave it there.
You address it when they ask.
Exactly.
Well, the problem is that they always
ask.
Yeah,
why is this?
Why is it only 25?
Yeah.
Well, because it's diluted to 25. Why would you do that? Well, there's a bunch of explanations for it, but it also happens to be a pretty nice happy medium for, it balances out for many drinks. Most drinks, it balances out pretty well in the 20s.
Yeah.
And that wasn't because the tax office knew what it was doing, but it wasn't nice coincidence.
Makes it difficult to use for cocktails, so doesn't it?
Oh, it's absolutely challenging.
Level.
Absolutely,
you definitely need the kind of genshu for the the undiluted ones. For
I
cocktails,
agree, and even with the genshu, you're going to have a very talented bartender to really, really go through it, really, really focus on it, and finding a way to highlight the qualities of the shochu. Especially, The most interesting shochu, I mean, are the really, really complex, earthy, pungent ones. I'm talking sweet potato shochu that's made with potatoes from super, super volcanic soil with all that minerality. And that's going to be outside of most people's wheelhouse. You've just got to think about it a lot. You got to try new flavor connections. And people eat a lot of sweet potato products, but guess what? Sweet potato shochu, whole nother world.
It's a whole different world.
And it's amazing. It's not for everybody, especially not for beginners. But once you get into sweet potato shochu, it's a lot like your super peaty scotch. It's a lot like your burn the back of your head off IPA. It's something that you kind of work into, and then once you figure it out, there's no going back. You're not going back ever. You're like, and you just need more and more. So it's a really interesting category. The entire shochu and awamori category, if you lump them together like that, forgive me, it's very, very interesting. Endless depth and complexity and diversity. But it's gonna take some talented folks to figure out new ways to mix these drinks if it goes that direction. I hope it does. I think it would be really interesting.
So there's a lot of potential to do some different interesting stuff because you get flavor profiles that you don't get.
They just don't exist in other categories.
Right.
Yeah.
That being said, being a little bit lower ABV, having a number of different drinking styles. You drink it on the rocks.
That's
you
right.
With water, maybe warm water.
Yep.
There's a lot of different ways you can approach that with tea. There's a lot of different approaches to shochu. It makes it a really nice sipping beverage, not just after a meal or sitting at the bar, but as you're snacking some tasty foods and things like that. Where does shochu? I think overseas it's still kind of blue ocean. Where does this sit on the table? But
from a drinks nerd, sorry to cut you off, but from a drinks nerd perspective, it's a very fascinating drink because, as I often say, there's not a pretentious bone in shochu's body. Basically, the way you like to drink it is the best way to drink it. So if you want to drink it on the rocks, absolutely. If you want to mix it 50-50 with hot water to boost the bouquet, absolutely. That's actually one of the traditional ways to do it. You want to mix it with soda? Go ahead. You want to make your own signature cocktail? Fine. You want to drink it in earthenware, pottery or in a wine glass, whatever. There are no rules. Do it your way. That's the great thing about shochu and awamori, but it's also the most confusing thing because people outside of Japan,
the right answer.
They're just like, well, but okay, I get it. Shochu is everything and can be anything to anyone, but what is it?
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's really hard to pigeonhole, and maybe that's something that the industry needs to focus more on.
I agree. I think you need to sell it as a spirit that's not like any other spirit in the world in that it's free. It comes with freedom, whiskey has a very, particular way you should enjoy it, and the purists will tell you shouldn't be drinking it that way or whatever. And it's true, with shochu, no one ever tells you that's not the way you drink shochu. They just kind of let you get on with it and enjoy it.
So we might be at a point where the market can tolerate something like that now. I'd like to think. I mean, if you're looking for a big boost, if you have the marketing power and all that stuff, you might need a more clear marketing message, possibly. But there's enough general interest around food and beverage and things right now where people are, I think I'd like to think that they're able to ready for something that is a little bit more, I don't want to say ambiguous, but more flexible.
It's a knuckleball.
Yeah.
It's a big old knuckleball.
Knuckleball.
Yeah. It's a fat knuckleball. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know. You just gotta kind of get your body in front of it.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to pair with food, isn't it? I mean, there isn't really. I mean,
it's hard to find a really blaring bad match. Yeah,
it just kind of seems.
It doesn't have
well
much acidity because it's a spirit. In the 20s, and most people don't. Nobody. I should say this: drinking shochu and awamori straight is not so common. It's usually it is at least on the rocks. Many times it's on the rocks with a little bit of added water, which is called mizuwari. With soda added, hot water, right? So it tends to get knocked down into the teens anyway. So you're talking about a spirit that has an ABV when you're drinking it in the 17 to 18% range, which is radically different from most other spirits that you would enjoy normally at home. So yes, it can go with a lot of food. And it doesn't fight with most stuff. So, of course, there are great pairings, and that's obviously another episode. But you can very safely consume this spirit with food, which is weird for people outside of Japan. Except for this part of the world. But in the countries we're from, and further and farther flung, yeah, it's not so normal to drink a spirit with your food, but in Japan, that's absolutely how it works. So yeah, drink it with food. If you're that adventurous, try it, because you will find some very happy marriages, just as you do with the other amazing drinks from Japan, except for maybe whiskey, I guess. Yeah.
One thing I would like to know, and perhaps we can move this into a different part of the program, depending how we edit it. But like, I would like to know how Chris discovered shochu. How did you fall in love with this beverage?
It's
We all
funny
have our
because
stories, right?
you found Awamori before
I did.
Before
And I just realized that
sake.
today. I just realized that today.
The funny thing is, I found sake before shochu. So I had some rather unimpressive experiences with Nihonshu in the United States. This was back in the 90s. It was when, everybody has this, not everybody, a lot of people have this story where you were given the sake that was open like 3 months beforehand by the previous customer who actually wanted to drink it. And they heat it up to kill some of the bitterness. And it still tastes like, I had a rather not nice word for it, but I was forced to drink it on numerous occasions. Came to Japan, was only planning to be here for a year. And while I was waiting for my missus to go to, she had a job that finished quite late, and I would go and kind of wait for her to get back to the station and walk her home. And there was a dirty little izakaya there, fantastic little place that did primarily sake. And I was enthralled at the quality of just average sake. I was like, this isn't anything like I had in the States. So I drank my way back and forth across those shelves like you wouldn't believe. And then one day, the master, he was like 195 years old, and he just like, okay, today we're having this, and it wasn't sake, and I had no idea what it was, but I smelled it, and I was like, this is a spirit, and my Japanese ability was not impressive at all. I hadn't studied the language before arriving, so.
And even better after going back and forth across the shelf.
Yeah, learning a word as you go, learning a word of bottle.
Well, you know what? Actually, to a certain extent, my Japanese gets way better in that instance.
There's that fine line there, right?
Yeah, there's the edge.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't gotten anywhere near the edge yet, so my Japanese was still obscenely it was inferior.
Oh.
I was at the first Japanese expression that I learned after thank you was awa nashi de kudasai. For when getting beer. I was like,
okay.
Don't give me a 3-inch head on my beer. So I would say no head on the beer. And they're like, huh? Like, just don't
learn the words that you need.
Don't push back on the lever. You only
Basic
pull the
survival
lever.
skills.
Basic
Yes.
survival skills, yeah.
So he pushed this glass in front of me. I smelled it. I was like, this is a spirit. He had no idea what I was talking about. He's like, just drink it. Basically gestures. So I took a sip. I was like, oh, that's interesting. What is this made from? And he didn't tell me, but I was like, oh, that's all right. Okay. And it was a Barley Shochu. And he was surprised that I didn't hate it. And I think he was hoping I was going to hate it. So the next thing he reached for was a sweet potato shochu, which most people from outside of Japan just cannot fathom. Or at least at that time they couldn't. And he pushed that in front of me, and I took a whiff of it. And I was like, whoa, this is not the same thing. What is this? He's like, it's shochu. I'm like, yeah, but you said the last one was shochu. He's like, no, it's also shochu. I'm like, how? They smell so completely different. And he said, I don't know. Shochu is shochu. Just drink it. So I took a sip. I was like, that's really interesting. I have never tried anything like that in my life. He's like, wow, foreign guy doesn't hate that either. Okay, let's try again. So he brought down a few more bottles of whatever shochu he had. And I went through 5 different types, all different ingredients. And I was gobsmacked that these were all called the same thing. I was like, how is this possible that something made from kokuto, something made from rice, and something made from sweet potato can be the same damn drink? I just was like, well, where do they make this? And eventually it came around that the word Kyushu came up. I had never heard that word before. It's made in Kyushu. I was like, where's that? Can I get there on a train? They said, yeah, technically.
if you have a day,
if you have a couple days. So, and of course, Wikipedia, this was early 2003. So Wikipedia was just in its infancy, did not have a shochu page, of course. So I had nowhere to go except for to Kyushu. So I was off. And that was the beginning of my
journey.
Rabbit hole.
Your rabbit hole.
Yeah, that was the very entrance to the rabbit hole. And yeah, I have that particular experience to wake me up to the fact that, you know what, when you go into the supermarket, all those bottles you can't read, probably about 40 to 50% of them are shochu. And I had no idea. I just thought they were all sake.
Yep.
I just
They do look very similar, the bottles, to be fair.
A lot.
And
I
the
mean, there's
labels as
once
well.
you know, then once you're really into it, then you can just looking at it for a nanosecond, you can say, oh, that's more of a sake style,
Yeah.
or oh, that's more of a shochu
Yeah.
style. You can see the stylistic differences, but to the uninitiated, no way.
We should probably say, actually, it's important. I think anyone wants to go out and kind of buy shochu, do be careful, because sometimes they do bottle the shochu in exactly the same kind of bottles as the sake. But
They
you
can look
also
really
have the
similar.
special kind of 900 milliliter kind of square bottles and slightly fatter bottles, right?
Right.
And then you can tell the difference between.
The main difference is basically the alcohol percentage.
Right,
So if you
right.
can find that, and annoyingly they don't always use a percentage symbol. They use
Right.
do
In Japan,
many
they
times.
use,
the
legal
degrees.
requirement to use the kanji.
So, but anything that's above 20 is going to be a spirit. And anything below 20, then you're more likely to be sake. So that's the easiest way to do it, I guess. Google Sensei is quite helpful these days, but Google Sensei also makes its own mistakes. For instance, Google Sensei will often translate mugi as wheat, but shochu is not made from wheat because it's an inferior starch source. It's always mugi, which is barley. And you see that all the time, wheat shochu. No.
Maybe you could learn the if you're going to learn any Japanese, maybe you learn the character for fire, and because that rarely appears on a bottle of sake, right? I mean, mostly.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah,
Now that
so you
mention
could
it.
look
even
for
in
that.
even in the names of different sake and stuff like that.
Maybe
you don't really see it.
hire, the
Ah,
pasteurization.
that's true.
But that's on the back. But that's on the back normally, isn't it?
Or on the.
Or could it be on the front?
Or on the
Okay,
shoulder.
that's
on
not
the
going to
this-
work.
Yeah.
Maybe learn the character for shochu. I mean,
Well, that's
it's
the
a
easy
pretty
way,
cool
yeah.
character.
That's
isn't
the
it?
easy way.
I mean, learn the character for shochu, learn the character for sake or nihonshu,
Seishu or Nihonshu.
seishu,
Yeah.
and then maybe you can tell them apart.
I guess
but-
you need to be able to tell the difference between sho and sei.
Yes. Both quite difficult characters.
Yeah, they both. Neither are ones that I
They're
could
both- they're
easily
both a
rattle
pretty
off with
tall
my
ask.
They're both pretty tall
Yeah,
asks.
tall asks,
Yeah.
but I said we do have a communication problem as a whole.
We do.
Just both all these industries,
Yeah.
both sake and shochu. I said it's not just the international community; it's people in Japan. I said a lot of them, they're used to it, so they can probably discern the difference. But
Yeah.
still, a lot of people here, they're going to walk in and really, unless they're,
Yeah.
pretty attuned to things, they're going to be confused as to
It's
what's
gonna-
on the shelf
it's-
as well.
It's a
So that's
challenge. It's all part of the fun.
Chris, thank you. Christopher,
you.
sorry, I say Chris, and that might
We got two
confuse our
Chris's, yeah.
listeners. This is,
Chris B and Chris H.
right?
Or,
There you go.
I say
Or-
we have to come up with other names to
Little
refer
Chris
to
and
you.
Big
Little
Chris's.
Chris. Yeah,
Yeah.
that works.
or
That works.
Shochu Christian.
That could work too.
Both. Yeah.
Well,
We'll come up with something.
Thank you, Justin.
We'll put down.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
So that was good. That was excellent. Now we have a strong foundation to build from,
Yes.
to build upon for upcoming episodes. Chris,
I found it really educational. I mean, I thought I knew shochu, and I mean, it's like that. Well, it's like that with sake as well, isn't it? Though, and I just realized how much I didn't know about shochu. So that's encouraged me to go out and discover more about this wonderful
I said,
beverage.
it's been a lot of fun doing this all together because I've had more chances to go out and do shochu a little bit more,
Yeah.
and it's made me proactive about my explorations and research into shochu as well. And so it's been a lot of fun. This is you're influencing us all in a very positive
thank you
way.
for having me,
Positive
Justin.
way,
I
so.
appreciate it, and I look forward to influencing your free time moving forward.
And with that, we have come to the conclusion of one more episode of Sake on Air. Thank you, gentlemen, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will be back in 2 weeks, I think.
Yes.
Definitely within 2 weeks,
We might
depending on where
surprise
this
you. We
when
might
this airs. It could be 1 week.
Yeah.
We've built up a lot of great interview content, so we were kind of trying to. It's tough to sit on this stuff for a long period of time. You get some good interviews and get a chance to chat with people, so we want to try and get that out into the world as fast as we can. So, in a week or 2 weeks, you'll hear from us again. Please do follow up with us. Send us your questions, comments, ideas, feedback to questions@sakeonair.com. You can leave us a friendly review on your favorite podcast listening site or resource. And you can always follow us on @SakeOnAir. And that should do it for another episode.
So, yes.
Where can everybody find you, gentlemen?
I'm on Twitter at Chris Pellegrini and on Instagram at Christopher Pellegrini. Sorry, Twitter doesn't allow my full name. And I'm reasonably consistent. So, yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
I'm on Instagram. I'm getting a lot of people telling me I should change my Instagram handle. I'll think about it. But it's a bit of a tricky one. Sake, same spelling as sake. No, N-O, and then tabibito, Tabibito. That's where you'll find me.
There it is. That's it. And you can find me on, Potsuke Productions is one. My personal handle, I guess, on Instagram is crew, CRU _Jones _33. If anybody can get to me with what that is a reference to,
I've been curious about it. I never thought about that.
I will send you a sake prize. I will. That is
okay.
It
Crew
will,
Jones 33.
If anybody can figure out what
I'm gonna
that
figure it
might
out
be
before
referencing
Chris.
or where that is from,
It's on.
Okay.
I will personally send a sake prize to anyone.
I think Frank's already got the answer.
So he's
It's the dark horse.
he's grinning. He's grinning.
It's the dark horse.
So anyway, that wraps up another episode of Sake on Air. Thanks to you gentlemen, as
Thank you
well
very
as everyone here at the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center that hosts us every week when we do this, and we will be back again very shortly with more sake and shochu love for each and every one of you.
Yes. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much.